Hi guys. Actually, the name is not Voice. It's Emmanuel Ajiri, and I like to consider myself as a citizen of the world, not from any specific country or any continent, but from the world. And I am here to represent VOIS. As you see on my T-shirt, it stands for Voices of International Students in Cyprus. It's an organization, non-governmental organization, which I formed with a couple of friends, all the international students. So I'm here to tell you three things: the why of voice, the what of voice, and the how of voice. As you notice, I don't stand here like the other speakers because I prefer being a little bit free when I talk. I had to collect a lot, so I use my hands. Well, basically, why voice? I mean, I've been here for, let's say, 3.5 years. I did my master's in international relations here, and I'm doing my PhD in international relations on the refugee issue and on human rights. And this got me really interested into the conditions of international students here in Northern Cyprus. And you know, basically, we all have our stories as international students. I mean, Northern Cyprus is an amazing place to live. When you look at the beaches, when you look at the scenery, and you consider the fact that it's an international environment where you get to meet lots of people and you learn a lot, it's an amazing place to live. But like any other place in the world, it also has its problems. And the international students especially have lots of problems. And we think that it's high time that we address these issues. Of course, we have our unique stories, but as well, we also have stories that are common. So when coming up with this idea of voice, we asked ourselves, what are these issues that international students face? Why is there a need to address these issues? We thought of issues like housing conditions, the exorbitant prices we have to pay for houses. We looked at working conditions. We looked at injustices on and off campuses. We looked at sexual harassment, which is on a high here in Northern Cyprus. We looked at racism and other forms of discrimination around the place. And we told ourselves that, I mean, we could sit in our houses and develop some form of apathy and just say, well, that's how things are, and let's try to survive. But then we asked ourselves as international students, or myself and a couple of friends, that what can we do to change things? How can we do it? So that's the why of VOIS. That is how VOIS came about. So we decided as international students to form a non-governmental organization, not registered under any school or under any ministry or other local administrative organizations, or however you might want to call them. But then what is VOIS? Well, VOIS stands for the Voices of International Students, as I have said, and I would want to say Northern Cyprus, at least for now. We intend that in the near future it might be something which grows into the Republic of Cyprus and other places as well, because everywhere in the world you always find international students. So we as VOIS have a couple of aims, and that's part of our what. But before I go into our aims, I would want to specify on the issue that VOIS is an apolitical organization. We don't involve ourselves in politics. It's a non-profit organization as well, and non-religious. While admitting members into these organizations, we do not really care about your race, we don't care about your political opinion, your sexual orientation, your religious affiliation, or where you come from. None of that matters. All that matters is that you share in our aims and our goals. And as international students as well, although we also accept locals into the organization, because there are some locals who actually work with us to try to change some of these conditions. Now, how do we intend to figure out, or how do we intend to solve some of the problems we face? As I earlier said, there are many things that we face. We have our unique stories, and we also have stories that cut across the ground. So when we look at things like housing conditions, we look at things like working conditions, we look at racism, we look at sexual harassment and other forms of discrimination. When you look at transportation too, I mean, as international students, we all face these things. I want to believe that the majority of us face these things. So we decided to come up with this platform where people can express themselves, because we felt that in order to bring any form of change, the first thing you need is awareness. We need to make people aware of these things. We need to make people understand, or our aim was to make people understand that we cannot sit back in our own dormitories or in our houses and accept or resign to this fate that, well, we are here in Northern Cyprus, that let's live our lives. So we need people to be aware, but not only the international students, we also need the locals to be aware of these injustices. Because when you speak to some locals, some of them are not even aware that what they do constitutes discrimination. They think that's how life is supposed to be. So for example, they think, I'll tell you a personal experience once, and it actually influenced my way of thinking. I got into this shop once in Famagusta. Well, so you just know, I drink a lot of alcohol. So I read a lot and I drink a lot while reading. So I got into this shop this evening to get some bottles of beer, and the owner told me he doesn't sell to black people. I mean, he told me that point blank. He was actually angry at that point in time because there was a black couple leaving the shop, and I think he had some form of confrontation with them, so he said he doesn't sell to black people. But to me, that was no excuse, because if you have a bad experience with one person, it doesn't necessarily translate to all others. And it's the same thing for housing conditions. I'm sure sometimes you might have had these experiences where you call and you're asking for a house, and they say, well, we don't give the houses to Nigerians or Africans, or sometimes Palestinians or Syrians. I mean, there are many of these kind of cases. And of course, I'm not saying that we are all innocent, or that we don't have any blame at all, any fault at all. We do have our faults as international students, and we admit those faults, but at the same time, you cannot take one brush and say, well, this is how all persons from Africa are, or maybe Nigeria or Cameroon or Syria or Palestine or Libya. So these are some of these issues which we decided to come up with, and to make the locals understand that these things are not right. Because in as much as we want to complain about these issues as international students, we cannot really have any change if we don't work with the locals. And so our approach is an all-inclusive approach. It's an approach which brings the locals and the international students to the same table to talk about these issues with the aim of coming up with solutions. But we do recognize as well that sometimes these solutions might take a very long while, because some of these things are systemic and it needs a lot of time to think and to talk and accept that these things exist before changing them. So we also try to come up with our own means as international students to solve these issues. And one of the means which we use as VOIS is to work with stakeholders like the Ministry of Labor, the Ministry of Education, and other ministries. So what we do with them, for example, the Ministry of Labor, is we went up to them and we spoke to them and basically made inquiries about the working conditions of students, because sometimes some of the issues which really affect us is the fact that we are ignorant, we don't have the information. And I don't know about you guys, but we conducted a poll, and unfortunately that was in Famagusta. We conducted a poll, and we realized that many international students don't know that they have a legal right to work for 6 hours. So sometimes you go into these restaurants or into other places of work and you are being exploited, and they tell you that you don't have a right to work, you are a student. But actually, you have a legal right as a student to work for 6 hours. You have a right to seek a working permit as a student. Of course, in order to get the working permit, you need to apply through the Ministry of Labor, and that's still in progress. And you have a right to a minimum wage. Now, the minimum wage for international students is 60% of that for non-students. But many of us are not aware about these things, and so we are exploited. You have students who work 12, 14 hours and are paid very meager fees. And it's something which we all accept and we just do. So that's one of the things that we do as VOIS. We create awareness. We try to seek for information from these ministries, and we send them directly to the students. We also try to have vox pops where we ask students about solutions that they think they can provide to international, to the communities, or how do you think that you can make these changes. One thing which we also try to do, or what we are trying to do now, and it's quite challenging, but we are really we are bent on doing this, is we are working on an app for international students. Well, this app is going to enable us rate taxis, rate universities, rate houses, rate restaurants, and this is for international students. So when we do rate this, it appears on our page, and you can all see the rating, so you know where to go and where not to go. Because, I mean, you can tell a taximan that I don't like the way you treat me, But you go to the next student, or you go into a house and you are told 15,000 Turkish liras or maybe 10,000 pounds, and you refuse to pay, the next international student comes and gets it. So it doesn't really change anything. So what we want to do is to empower the international students. How? Why we have these ongoing negotiations with stakeholders in order to change the mindsets of the locals and our mindsets as well. How, or what are some of those techniques which we can use to actually empower young people? And one of them is by creating these apps. Now, what we also do as well is we have open mic nights where we encourage international students to express what they feel and their experiences here. Now, these experiences are not all negative. There are lots of positive experiences here. The aim is to give a platform for international students to talk about these issues and to look for common grounds or solutions to these problems. Now, I'm not going to take, I did law as an undergraduate, and trust me, I could talk here all day long, but I won't want to bore you as well. I just want to introduce some members of VOIS who came all the way from Magusa with us. We have one of our video directors, Mr. David. He actually has a phone with him because we actually do videos. We create animations as well and put online to actually so that people understand what we are doing. We have our media secretary, Miss Esne Febo, seated in the middle. She probably has the most difficult job because students ask her questions on the page all the time. Sometimes you won't believe some of the questions that we ask, and she has to respond to them. So her resolve is quite strong. We have a couple of artists who work with us here. We have Mr. Zai, who is most of the time he does spoken words. We have Darren as well, Miss Darren, who is also one of our artists. Unfortunately, we could not bring all of our board members here because we are actually, at the moment, we have another activity which we are doing at the Eastern Mediterranean University campus. We are part of a team that is doing an EcoBus. It's called an EcoBus, some sort of a festival on unity and diversity. So some of us we had to rush here very fast. If you see my t-shirt is still a little bit crumpled because we had to be very fast here. I think during the panel discussion, you get to know more about what we do exactly as VOIS. But as a gift, we decided to come here with VOIS branded pens. I think they do have the pens, VOIS branded pens, to give you as gifts. We'll be sharing the pens across. And if you want to be a member of this organization, and which we believe that all international students should be members of, should be a member of this organization, because what we are doing is not for me. I might have come up with the idea with a couple of others, but we are all international students. We all have our different stories, and these stories need to be heard. And I want to believe that you can all contribute towards this movement because we are stronger together. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and I hope we can answer some of your questions later. Thank you.